Good afternoon. I would like to welcome you to our new series of webinars on gender-sensitive social protection that FAO is jointly organizing with the IPC Center in Brasilia. My name is Maja Gavilovic and I'm a social protection specialist working for FAO. And today we will be discussing how to design insurance instruments for poor rural women. And we will be discussing two specific case studies, including the examples of the Vimo Seva cooperative in India, as well as WFP's R for Resilience initiative in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, most of the works of FAO on gender and social protection has focused on non-contributory social assistance programs and regular transfers, such as cash transfers or public works. And we have been exploring how these social protection instruments can be made more gender sensitive. We can't say that we know a great deal about the role that contributory insurance schemes can play to provide protection to poor women at times of shocks and even encourage the risk-taking or productive behaviors. So this webinar is going to tackle this knowledge gap, and we will explore how contributory insurance schemes can be designed and delivered to address women-specific needs and priorities for social protection at times of crisis. And we will focus on health and agricultural insurance. We will also explore what are some of the key opportunities as well as challenges and potential entry points to increase women's access to affordable insurance through social protection. Now let me introduce the three panelists who are joining us today. We will first hear from Christina Dankmeyer, and Christina currently works as an advisor to the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development within the GIZ Social Protection Sector Initiative. And she will introduce GIZ's work on inclusive insurance and talk briefly about the development of and the key findings of their recent publication, which is entitled A Compendium of Technical Notes and Case Studies on Mainstreaming Gender and Targeting Women in Inclusive Insurance. Our second panelist is Mr. Shrikant Kumar, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Vimo Seva Cooperative, and he was instrumental in setting up a highly successful Vimo Seva insurance cooperative for and by women. And he will be joined by his colleague Tara Sinha, who is a gender and microinsurance expert, and they will discuss the experience of Vimo Seva Cooperative in running a self-sustainable health and financial protection for informal women workers across India. And finally, our third presenter is Matthew Dubrow, and he is a micro-insurance advisor at the World Food Programme in the Climate and Disaster Risk Reduction Unit. And he will introduce the WFP's R for Resilience initiative and talk about how this program provides different types of agricultural insurances to poor rural women, and also explore some of the effects that this has on their food security, income generation, and productive outcomes. And he will draw from his experience and lessons learned from Senegal, Zambia, Malawi, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Zimbabwe. Now, in terms of the webinar format, we will first hear from panelists. Each would make a short presentation of about 10 minutes, and then we will open the floor for Q&A. And I invite you to ask questions. Either you can write them directly into GoToWebinar chat bar, or you can do it through social media, and you can post the questions through Twitter and Facebook using hashtag sp.org webinar. And finally, we would like to invite you to join our socialprotection.org platform and our online community on gender-sensitive social protection. And all the materials will be documented and posted there. So you can find the references to today's webinar and past webinars on social protection and gender. And I invite you to join and contribute to discussions. So let me now give floor to Christina. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, also from my side. My name is Christina Dankmeyer. I'm an advisor with GIZ, and I have the pleasure of introducing the two country cases you will hear about today. In particular, the first example, Vimo Seva from India, because this case study was actually part of the publication that I helped edit, and which I will be presenting to you in terms of the results and recommendations that came out of it. And yeah, first of all, the slide is already there. We're going to take a step back though, because overall in the current discourse on social protection, we talk about social protection for all. So universal social protection. So why specifically look at women, and why now? First of all, women overall face different risks than men due to, for example, maternity, so biological factors, or also their caretaker role in the household. But also they face additional challenges in terms of access and usage, and this is something that we can actually address. So one of them is legal access. In 155 out of 173 countries, there's actually at least one law restricting women's economic opportunities, which is something that the World Bank Group found in the Business Women and the Law research. Also, you got to consider that the majority of women in developing countries actually work in the informal sector, so they're unprotected by labor laws and also may be excluded from social protection systems that actually are geared towards formal employment. Then the second one is fairly obvious, socioeconomic access. Women are disproportionately represented among the poor. Women also undertake the lion's share of unpaid work that includes childcare, for example, or care of the elderly, and that is not reflected in any pension scheme whatsoever. And women also work less in paid employment, but then once they do, they actually usually work for lower pay and less benefits. In addition to that, there are obviously also cultural factors and issues around physical access. So cultural issues include inheritance customs, for example, restrictions on assets or land ownership, and also divorce practices would be an example. And physical access, I mean, just imagine a woman who is working and taking care of several family members at the same time. So obviously there are issues around time constraints or also actually getting from A to B in a certain amount of time to access insurance. And finally, access to knowledge. There are still lower literacy rates among women. So this background was actually the motivation for the publication that was published earlier this year. If you can go to the next slide. The publication, as Maya said, is called Mainstreaming Gender and Targeting Women in Inclusive Insurance. And this was developed not just by two GIZ teams, so my team working on social protection and the Global Initiative working on access to insurance, but also the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank Group was one of our partners, and Women's World Banking. And we also received contributions from other partners like the Access to Insurance Initiative and the Self-Employed Women's Association. So this publication actually combines different perspectives. So one from the industry perspective, we have 3 different chapters on that, and then also government stakeholder perspectives. And then also goes into 4 country case studies. So now let's look at what we actually know, so what the compendium tells us. Next slide, please. There are documented examples of insurance for women and also by women that have proven that this type of insurance actually works. So some of the cases we looked at in the publication were the cooperative-driven health cover in India, Vimoseva, that you're going to hear about shortly after my presentation. Then also the compulsory health cover in Jordan, and microinsurance mutuals in the Philippines. And then we actually have a second example from India as well, so 4 case studies overall. There is data on arguments for having insurance that's coming up. So one example would actually be that 18% of women in Indonesia have outstanding loans on health and emergencies. In India, it's 12.6% of women. So that's a very strong case that shows that there is a particular pressure on poor families, and this is actually the most common strain on women's savings and assets. Then there's qualitative information that we can use. There is, for example, some really relevant information on female agents that bring better results for women in terms of insurance. There are female agents, for example, at Bharti AXA in India, or also female female center workers of mutuals in the Philippines. Yeah, and finally, there's an interest of the private sector in this new market segment, additional market segment, and increasingly also by development partners, while regulators are only beginning to act. So now we're actually just going to look at a short list of recommendations that are coming out of this publication. There are quite a few, but I've picked the most interesting ones for you. So first of all, the first one is relatively obvious. There is a need to collect and analyze inclusive insurance sex disaggregated data on both the supply and the demand side. So data on how women's needs actually differ from men's and which options are out there for them. Secondly, promoting gender diversity is important not only among regulators, so in the public sector, but also in the insurance industry. And this refers to the example I provided earlier on female agents in the insurance industry. Then thirdly, making financial literacy programs more responsive to women clients, because often knowledge and education and also literacy are the first barriers for women. Then the supporting a regulatory environment for new products and distribution channels, and also research on that to target women clients. And then finally, also addressing other legal and policy constraints that may also indirectly limit access and usage of insurance. And this is something that came out of the Jordan example quite clearly. Because yeah, it's just many different legal and policy areas that may not necessarily directly relate to insurance that actually affect how women can access it. So this is what we now know, but here is also what we don't know. Next slide, please. And what will be needed in the future. We still need more data to make a business or an economic case, a business case for the private sector and an economic case for the public sector, to highlight that support serving women is actually good business, and also from a government perspective, a good investment in society. So for this, you obviously need sex disaggregated data, as I mentioned before. There are examples that I've mentioned, but we still need more examples beyond traditional social insurance. So this is something like life or asset insurance, or also agricultural insurance, which is what you'll hear about in the second case study later today. Yeah, and this also actually concerns social insurance, but going in additional sectors like social insurance, like pensions for the informal sector. And thirdly, it is really important to find out which incentives will actually work for the different actors that we would like to engage. So which incentives are useful for insurers. They may differ from those for community organizations, for supervisors, policymakers, etc. And then finally, how new technologies can actually be leveraged and affect women and help them access insurance. This is it for now. On the next slide, you'll see how you can access the publication that I was just talking about. There's also information on the launch, which took place in April this year at the IMF World Bank Spring Meetings. And you can also use the hashtag that is given on the slide. Thank you very much. And any questions you will have later, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Excellent, Christina. Thank you so much. And if you haven't done already, yes, I strongly suggest that you actually inspect this wonderful publication. So may I now invite Mr. Sri Kumar to start his presentation.
Thank you, Maza, and thank you, Christina, for giving this wonderful background. So I'm Shrikant, and good evening, everyone from India. And I'm going to present about the case study of Vimo Seva, the insurance cooperative of the Self-Employed Women's Association, SEWA, along with my co-presenter, Tara Sinha. SEWA is the largest trade union of informal women workers in India, and more than 1.5 million women workers are associated with it. As Christina said in her last presentation, that women and men both face risk and vulnerability, and especially if they are poor. But when gender aspects come, things become more serious. As she said that there are different types of risk women are facing in their life, especially the informal worker, uncertainties about her work, uncertainties aggravated due to loss of any financial aspects, and these social protection are much needed for poor women worker. Any unforeseen events, I may ask to go on next slide. Any unforeseen events like hospitalization or death in any earning family members brings further stress on the family. Based on our experience of SEWA Bank, which was established way back in 1974 by SEWA as first financial organization for informal worker in India, we realized that financial tools are much needed for informal sector workers. Next slide, please. So, based on our experience, Vivo Seva is providing a risk mitigation tool, to cover the financial risk for informal sector workers and their families, to help them during any emergency. But the best part of this entire endeavor is that it should be owned and financially viable through their own organizations like cooperatives, where they are users, managers, and owners. And that brings a lot of solidarity and sisterhood in this entire setup. Next slide, please. So, genesis of Vimo Seva started in early 70s itself by demand of life insurance to protect the Seva Bank loanees. But Vimo Seva as a program in formal way started in 1992 with both life and non-life products like health, accident, and other different types of insurance. Working on this insurance business, we established the cooperative, which is first of its kind in India in 2009, and more than 12,000 women are shareholders, and we are insuring more than 100,000 women and their family members with more than 10 products. Next slide, please. If I talk about the Vimo Seva approach and how as a all women cooperative, it is different for any other insurance companies or organization. If we talk about even the product development, we are responding to the need of women. If I give an example, in early 2000 when we started developing different products in India, there were hardly any products available for the coverage of gynecological ailments. But based on our experience and need of women, which an organization like Seva can only understand, we make sure that these type of products can be developed. Again, what Christina talked in her last presentation about education, financial education, and we make sure that this education reach to women through their promoters, which are women themselves. To make sure that they get the formal sector experience, we are linking with the insurance companies, and all insurance promoter and sellers are women themselves, because they can only understand the problem of women, and they can easily go to their workplace, to their homes, and explain to them in detail in much more comfortable way. They can also provide services and claim processing at their doorsteps in their own language and in their own way. We have lots of data management, and we are analyzing those data to intervene as per the specific needs of our members. We are targeting our members through different partner organizations also, so that we can reach as much as members. If I will talk about the evolution of product, we started from life insurance only, but right now we are providing different types of product, including for income loss, where they can get reimbursed for or loss of employment due to any medical exigency. Next slide, please. So I will talk about the effect of insurance product and services on women clients. In last more than 25 years, we have reimbursed more than $300 million of claim, which are as some of the claims are as low as even $5 or $10. What we have learned over a period of time that due to these financial risk mitigation tools, this alleviates anxieties caused due to uncertain risk they are going to face, and that helps in utilizing their money in much more productive way for their families, for their businesses, and they are judiciously able to employ those money for developing their businesses. We realize that it has increased their regular income also, because due to that they are starting taking more care of their health elements. In India, we experience that women take care of health at last, because in her family, her husband or her children are more important than her own. Based on our interventions, we lowered the access barrier to these key financial services, which is much needed for any informal sector worker. Next slide, please. So now we can see that Vimoseva is financially viable. We are not getting any assistance from any agency. Entire premium is paid by member themselves. We are growing year on year, and now we have reached to more than 7 Indian states, and we are providing inputs to the government of India to develop such health insurance schemes and bring such schemes to poor and amend the policies to help spreading these type of services. Next slide, please. But this journey was never easy. We faced a lot of challenges, and the major challenge was the sustainability, because as we know that financial education needs a lot of sources, and poor women organization has limited resources, so it took some time for us to become sustainable. Scaling up, because we need regular investment in education, but we are bringing client value because we have to manage the social aspect as well as economic aspect, both in those limited resources. Then the regulatory framework, because regulatory framework are not suitable to our need and requirement, especially there is no special regulation for cooperatives or mutuals or organizations which are for poor. Next slide, please. What we learned that for successful implementation, trust is the key, because the promoter, the manager, everyone is from the same community, and women trust their peers than anyone else. Our large grassroots networking with different type of similar organizations also helped us. Then bringing committed technical person to understand the issues of this informal sector and bringing solution also helped a lot. Then we evolved over a period of time by learning and getting feedback from our members. last but not the least, the strong commitment to financial viability, because that was very necessary to make it sustainable for long terms and scale up at large scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shri. I will pass the floor to Tarasina, if she wants to make some contributions.
I think Shri Kumar has mentioned all that we had to. I can join in with the question answers as required. Thanks. We can move to the next presentation.
No problem. Okay, Matthew, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. So I'm Mathieu Dubreuil, I'm microinsurance advisor for the World Food Program, and I will try to give you an idea of the approach and the impact that we have on gender through the R4 initiative. I first wanted to mention that R4, the Rural Resilience Initiative, is a strategic partnership with Oxfam America. Next slide, please, and actually next slide again to the rationale. Basically, I mean, you've heard in the last two presentations, I mean, the reason why we're having this this session this afternoon. But for us, one key thing is that in general, women are most food insecure, and they have definitely less access and control over land, over resources, even over their own time. So it's very difficult for them to strengthen and to contribute through financial development to the livelihood and the income of their household. We see that in all the 6 countries we're working in, we have like really strong inequality between men and women. That we have like very limited access to land, very limited access to financial resources, to capacity to develop their agricultural production, and thus to have an impact on food security and access to food. Next slide, please. The R4 model is first something that is very important. I think it's that we're having a social protection angle. When we talk about insurance itself, usually, especially on agricultural insurance, we have like 2 approaches. In general, it's the transformative aspect, meaning that insurance is helping insured to unlock access to investment, to credit, so that they can increase their income. But it can also have a very strong protection angle, and that's really the approach that we're taking, evolving over time. So basically, the R4 model is always building on a social safety net program that is existing either within WFP or implemented by the government. And there is first a risk reduction component, usually that is built on asset creation, where participants build assets and in exchange they receive transfers of food, cash, or vouchers. And the idea comes from an Ethiopian farmer who was very much interested by having an insurance against drought. And he was asking us, I cannot afford the premium, so can I work additional days on the assets, and in exchange you would pay for the premium? And that's how the R4 model started to be built. And on top of the 2, so the risk reduction and the risk transfer, where we have the insurance for assets, so construction of assets and transfer with the premium. We added the risk reserve, which are mostly the saving component, and the prudent risk taking, which is, we can be summarized with access to credit, but it's more broader. It's more about like how we increase capacity of investing of participants. And when we look at all of this, we see that the gender balance is essential. So this year, we're more or less insuring 55,000 people in 6 countries: Ethiopia, Senegal, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Next slide, please. About the gender-sensitive approach that we're having, WFP has a very clear guidance and policy about gender sensitivity, and I wanted to mention something that seems to be key, is that it's about finding the balance between women, men, girls, and boys, and it's not about only targeting women. It's about providing food assistance adapted to the different needs. And that's the reason why, like, well targeting the assets is essential in the way that we are building R4. Finding equal participation from the design to the implementation and the monitoring, meaning that we find it extremely important that women participate in the design of the insurance product, for instance, and in the selection of the assets. But we also find it extremely important that men equally participate to the saving groups, for instance, which are usually targeted for women. It's important that the decision-making process is also including women and girls, and they are gaining power in the households, and then finding some gender and protection aspects. So, for instance, food assistance should not harm to the safety, dignity, and integrity of women, men, girls, and boys receiving it. So that's very key. I wanted to mention like a couple of things about South African countries where we see like really strong gender inequalities in Malawi and Zambia. And especially where we see that women have a much lower labor capacity compared to men, which means that they have like a much more limited impact in terms of productivity and income generation. And that's the reason why we're trying to work specifically with them on that. And in Kenya, on the other hand, men find that the asset creation with transfer is not as productive and remunerative compared to their own businesses, and that's the reason why, in general, we're having more women in those programs. Next slide, please. So we're trying with R4 to remove the barriers so that women can have better access to climate risk management services, and we're trying to redesign the program and the components so that we're enhancing this gender balance. And we'll just focus on the risk transfer because it's kind of the topic of today, but we could talk about the other components during the questions. But basically, when we go to the field, we interact a lot with the communities to develop the products. We work a lot with Columbia University mostly, but also some other partners like Pula in Kenya. But we always try to regroup the community so that we select what are the worst years that are affecting the communities regarding crop production. And we make sure that women have a say in the way they are participating to targeting those years, but also selecting the right parameters for the index insurance product. We're also trying to promote properly the integration of the insurance with the other components and to have a sense of how women can be, let's say, empowered. And so this approach has shown some very interesting results that we'll see a bit after in terms of access to services, but also in terms of income generation and benefits through the impact evaluation. Next slide, please. So with R4, there is something, and in general with WFP, something that is also important to notice is that we're not targeting individuals, so we're not targeting specifically women, but we're targeting households. And that's for the reason why, if we look at the 4 components in Senegal last year, we had like the risk reduction component with 12,000 participants and more or less 50-50 participation between male and women, but 12% female-headed households. Regarding the risk transfer, it's also slightly more women that are insured through the insurance for assets approach, but it's not like significantly different. But when we look at the risk reserves, it's definitely many more women, and we're really trying to promote the men groups. And when it comes to prudent risk taking, which is a very small component so far, it's definitely 50-50. So if we look at the figures on the next slide, please. I just wanted to show you 2 things. First, we're having one country where definitely the balance is not very good, is Ethiopia, where we have less than 40% of female participations. But in all the other countries, it's in general quite well balanced, except in Malawi and definitely Kenya, where we have like many more women than men for the reasons I was mentioning before. But for the first time this year, because the Ethiopia portfolio used to be much more predominant overall, we managed to reach a 50-50 participation of female and men in the overall portfolio. And that's something that we're really trying to target. Next slide, please. So in terms of impact, first, about Ethiopia, we conducted several rounds of impact evaluation, but I'm going to talk about the one that was published last year. First, the impact evaluators consider that the weather index insurance component has the strongest impact of all the components, which is very good to know, but it's important to know that it's like a package. But insurance has an impact on investment and production and income diversification. So for instance, there is a clear increase in agricultural investment, more for female-headed households and male-headed households and non-insured households. And particularly, there is a clear impact on spending on higher labor and higher adoption, meaning that women have been more able to start cultivating their own land. There's also an increase in the amount of land planted, which is very interesting, and an increase in investment in improved seeds, and also increase in the number of loans, meaning that really female-headed households and women have a better access to diversification sources, financial services, and so on. There is also a very interesting example of the amount borrowed increased by 225% more for female-headed household than who participated to the insurance for assets than for the non-insured household. And it's important that it's during and after the drought. Next slide, please. Now about Senegal, which has more or less the same types of impact. Overall, for the participants of R4, we see that there is a much stronger resilience and resistance when there is a drought for the household who are insured than for those who are not insured. We can see with the graph on the right. There is definitely an impact in terms of responsibility and decision-making among women in the different households. And there is also an increase of men participating to the saving for change, so the saving groups, which is still very limited, but overall the saving groups are really, really key. And I want to say that in Senegal, the interesting aspect is that we are trying to use and leverage the saving groups to integrate all the financial inclusion. So the insurance component product is distributed through the saving groups, even if some insured participants are not actually saving through those groups. And that's also a good way of attracting men to the financial services and to the, let's say, the tools that are usually targeted for women. And similarly, we're also trying to pull women to help them grow more cereals, and on the other hand, pull men so that they can also grow a bit more vegetables, which don't have the same impact and the same role in the households. Next slide, please. I think it's my last one. Yes. About the challenges. First, as I was mentioning, we don't specifically target women for the insurance component. It's a household targeting approach. And so, well, first, I'm not a gender specialist and I'm not an M&E specialist. I'm an microinsurance specialist. But that was very useful for me to prepare this presentation. So thanks for inviting me. But beyond that, the interesting aspect is that we have very limited information about the impact of women within male-headed households. We really have impact on women, female-headed households. So we really need to change and improve our M&E system on this. Also, the insurance only makes sense if it is integrated in a broader risk management strategy, meaning that insurance for us as a standalone is not very efficient. It's really there to to capture the low impact, the high impact, but low frequent shocks and weather shocks. And so that's important that we have the other components such as saving, such as disaster risk reduction, and also access to investment capacities, so that the whole household is better protected. And that's the reason why it's important to find the right gender balance. And I have to say that in general, we think that the insurance component is probably the one that is the best balance. Also, insurance is definitely not solving all the problems, and that's the reason why we need different tools and different approaches so that we better deal with the gender balance issue. Regarding the design process, it's extremely important to make some specific efforts. What we see in general when we review the communities, we have like maybe 25% women and 75% men. And if men are talking, women will not say a word in most of the countries. So that's extremely important that we make groups and we listen and we impose women speeches so that also men can hear what they have to say. That's very important. Sometimes we actually need to split between women groups and men groups. As I was mentioning before, also we're trying to balance a little bit the fact that men are usually focusing more on cereals and women on vegetables, trying to help women grow more cereals if that makes sense for the community and for the households, so that they can also increase their income generation. And on that, we're trying to see how we can support behavioral change that are still not harming the community. I just wanted to make a small point on Ethiopia, where we have a specific situation. I mean, you've seen that the participation of women in general in buying insurance is definitely fewer than the other countries, but also we have less women participating in the insurance than the women that are participating to the asset creation under the productive safety net program. So we need to see how we can target that. And having a workshop recently with all the Ethiopian stakeholders participating in AFO, we saw that basically it's extremely difficult to involve women, including in the implementation team, where we have like mostly men taking decision and implementing, including in the field. It's probably the only country where we have that. And so we need to see, I mean, sometimes there are some limitations in the even in the capacity to find women who can take some positions, but here we see like a very clear limitations where then it's even more difficult to involve women. And so it has a limited impact also on decision making among the communities. But at the same time, we're seeing like some very specific approaches made by the PSNP and the R4 team when we see some women and female-headed households who have some really difficult situation. So for instance, like newly divorced women have very specific follow-up and support in terms of asset creation, access to credit, savings, and insurance. And I think that's also something that is important to highlight. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't been too long.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Actually, I'm glad you've been a bit longer than we initially said we're gonna, because we have plenty of time now for discussions. So I would like to invite the participants to ask questions. Please don't be shy. So we can discuss some of the specific issues. Maybe just to open up with my question to all the participants is something that I have been thinking quite a lot. And Matthew has touched on this in his presentation when he spoke about the Ethiopia and the example of the PSNP. But what I'm actually interested in is how can contributory insurance schemes be best linked to the existing social protection systems or the national flagship programs? And what are some of the opportunities and the challenges that you may or you have encountered in this creation of linkages? So maybe let's start with Christina, with her sort of macro perspective on this issue, and then we can talk to Sri Kumar about Vimos Seva, and then Matthew can maybe fill in some of the gaps on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really broad question. How much time do I have? So first of all, I would say, I mean, that obviously varies. Like, it depends on the type of insurance that you're looking at. So maybe I'll just refer to the social sector, pick some examples there. So health insurance, obviously, maybe pensions and accident insurance, because those some of the types of insurance that GIZ is working on. So for health insurance, there are examples of, as one way of linking different providers, so both private and public providers, to the national system. For example, including in the implementation of a national scheme. So that could be that insurers are actually contractors and payers for services, and then also take care of enrollment, empanelment of hospitals into the national scheme, and also settle hospital claims. That would be one way of doing it, which is actually what is happening already in India. There's the national RSBY scheme, and GIZ is actually supporting the government of India and the state governments involved in that. And one way of actually supporting poorer households then is potentially subsidizing their coverage. That would be one way of doing it. For old age, one important consideration is that actually women's activities have to be recognized under a pension scheme, so a national pension scheme, ideally. That obviously concerns also informal work, so either formalization of work or recognizing informal work as options to paying into a pension scheme is a means that you can use, and then also because women often lack a way to convert their savings into funds that are large enough to support them in old age. So obviously, yeah, that's a really important way of doing it. And then also for, I mean, accident insurance is one example that I would pick because it also links to labor market interventions. Embedding accident insurance into national, like a social protection policy, or also labor laws. When it comes to labor market interventions, you have to consider labor rights of women as well, and insurance coverage, and then also labor market legislation ensuring equal pay or anti-discrimination laws for insurance. That's a really big one. Yeah, and then also obviously something that's really important is linking insurance schemes to social assistance, because some people may require that. You can, for example, supplement income geared towards women or female-headed households in terms of the type of benefit, like maternity or also unemployment benefits, specific child grants, for example. And then you also need to look at instruments that you can use to actually link those different types of support. One way of doing that would be a social registry, so unified beneficiary registry, to actually be able to bundle fragmented social benefits. One example is a social ID card that was actually also discussed in India for some time, also to target informal workers. And then also single window service centers, because they can then handle enrollment and submission to various benefits and services, and can help women who are, like I said, often time constrained due to work and their additional caretaker role. Those are just some examples. There's much more, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Christina. So, Sri or Tara, do you have any suggestions on how? Oh, actually, can you tell us how Vimoseva in any way is linked to the national flagship social protection programs, like the Mahatma Gandhi Public Works, for example?
Yes. So I would just briefly talk, and then I would request Tara Sena to just, if she wants to add. So the government is providing social assistance in form of Manrega by providing employment and different type of cash transfer schemes. So our social protection management was to complement those needs where still gaps were existing. Like first we started creating awareness and linked our insurance awareness program with this type of awareness. And it was not just awareness creation, we started linking, like helping our insured members to getting Manrega work, to getting Manrega cards updated, and if says eligible for any government social assistance, we started helping her in getting that also. Apart from that, we start complementing the need by designing new products. As I shared earlier briefly, that we designed a income security product, insurance product, where if she falls sick and due to that there is some wage loss, then we will reimburse some of her wages due to loss of hospitalization. Apart from that, we started adjusting some of our products, existing products, and bringing some special features, because lower strata of society we are getting social assistance, so we start moving from those informal workers who may not be technically qualifying for those social assistance, but they still need this type of social protection. Then we start linking them with different other risk mitigation tools also, like through Seva Bank by providing savings, credits and other things, with our other sister organizations by providing housing, water, sanitation, health awareness, so that the prevention should happen, and then these social protection tools like insurance can be more useful.
Yeah, I think Shri has said it all. This is Tara. So I just wanted to add, as Christina mentioned, the single window service centers through which women are linked to other programs. That's what Shri meant when he said that when the RSBY scheme, the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana scheme, was introduced, which is a health insurance scheme for people below the poverty line, what Bima Seva did was to help people who were eligible for that scheme to go through these single window service centers and get linked to those schemes. So I think basically those are the sorts of examples we did at Bima Seva.
Thank you very much, Tara. Matthew, would you like to add something on this issue? I mean, you spoke about the link to PSNP in Ethiopia, but in any other of your country examples, are these synergies being explicitly linked, and what is your experience with this?
Yeah. So, well, first, I think like it's important. I mean, when we want to link the insurance as a social protection tool with social protection systems, first it's key if there is the similar targeting in terms of, for us, food security and vulnerability level, so that also when we are working on the assets, there is more or less the same goal to lower to improve food security and lower the impact of climate shocks. It's definitely easier when we include it into the existing WFP programs, such as the food assistance for asset activities, which is the case in Senegal, in Malawi, and in Kenya, not in Ethiopia, because it's internal programs, and so the overall programming of the activities and the integration of all this is obviously much easier than working with the government. But ultimately, we are there to also strengthen the capacities and the systems of the government. So we really want to hand over to the governments. But in terms of challenges, I wanted to mention like 3 things. First, well, with the PSNP in Ethiopia, they don't have the same graduation path there compared to R4, so that sometimes we have participants who are graduated from PSNP, so they are no longer receiving food transfers, but they're still within R4, and so they're receiving insurance as a transfer. So the graduation process has to be quite similar and very well coordinated, and that's the reason why it's important to integrate the different tools. In many countries, yet insurance is not a transfer mechanism in the 4 countries, whereas for WFP, for instance, insurance premium is recognized as a transfer modality. So it's either important to include it in the social protection policy, and we see some very good progress in the different countries, like in Senegal, where we're using the same register, and it's being included in the policy. We're seeing it also in Malawi and in Ethiopia, although it's not operationally active. Or we can have like some different approach, like in Zambia, where we do work with the government and FAO, and the risk reduction component is actually conservation agriculture application, which is very different. And the major difference is that there's no transfer on the risk reduction component except capacity building of farmers, and it's obviously a much cheaper approach overall.
Thank you very much. I have received a round of questions from the audience. I have 3 questions for each one of you. It's a mixed range of questions. So I will start with Christina. The first question is, what role can development agencies such as GIZ play in advocating for and promoting gender-sensitive insurance policy and programming? The second question is for Matthew. Following your involvement and experiences in communities across Ethiopia, what kind of role have national institutions played in helping you address issues faced by women? And then I have a question for Wimos Seva. What kind of links did you need to establish with the health service providers to ensure that beneficiaries have access to quality healthcare? So let me just pass on the floor to Christina to start responding. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, we obviously developed this publication to also then use the recommendations of the compendium for our work. So GIZ is mostly supporting national schemes like health insurance, so in India, for example, or also Indonesia. The largest social health protection scheme in the world. In Indonesia, it's around 300 million people. And for these kinds of schemes, the recommendation around removing indirect barriers, like due to policy constraints, for example, that's probably the most important factor. So actually looking into how you can address informal sectors, how you can help them access national insurance schemes. That's one really big point. Or in Bangladesh, we're supporting accident insurance. And Bangladesh, obviously, because of the textile industry, and that's also mostly female workers. So the recommendations that I mentioned earlier, ideally, are also taken up by that work. But then I think beyond just our work, there's other things that we can do. So I mean, there are obviously partnerships like the one for this publication that really help keep the topic afloat and bring awareness to it, because I do think there is quite a significant interest from the private sector. We also at the launch, we had quite a few representatives from the insurance industry, but really also getting regulators involved, getting policymakers involved, because insurance is often just seen as something that's an individual choice and not necessarily a responsibility for society, as like a solidarity mechanism. And I think that is something where a certain like a change of the mindset of people actually has to happen. And then also obviously at a global level, discussions around social protection, they're currently really focused on social assistance, specifically in the context of fragile states, also in the context of forced displacement, migration. People really focus on cash transfers, for example, public works as well. but just reminding people that insurance, specifically social insurance, is a really important additional mechanism to protect people and prevent them from falling into poverty again, and also in the context of resilience, as Mathieu's example highlighted. Thank you. I hope that helps.
Thanks a lot. So let's go to Mathieu.
Thanks. It's definitely not an easy question. So I'm just going to start with the targeting itself that is made. I mean, let's say that the objectives and the global framework is definitely involving national stakeholders, such as the Ministry of Social Protection, when there exists in Ethiopia, the PSNP at national level and not only at Tigray and Amhara levels. But it's also obviously implemented by local stakeholders. So it's important to find the right balance, but to involve and to include our approach into the national systems. And that's the case, I think, in Kenya, for instance. We do work with the county governments, and we do also work with the ministries of agriculture. To be very honest, when it comes to insurance, I don't think the gender approach is like that prominent. It's more the overall targeting of our four. And then within this, there are the participants. But I don't think that our implemented partners are actually really specifically targeting women for the insurance component. And about the involvement of the national institutions, also, I mean, we're building index design teams in countries so that we can really transfer the capacity to develop the products and to carry the risk at country level. Of course, there are still some ranges, but usually it involves Ministry of Agriculture, the Met Agency, the insurance company, sometimes Agricultural Research Institute, and we are building with Columbia University the skills so that the national stakeholders are definitely able to do that. But again, when it comes to designing an index product, except interacting with the communities and making sure that the women participate to the design and the selection of the parameters, it's what I personally don't really see what else we could do more on that. Over.
Thank you. Over to Shri and Tara.
So in our case, we took this approach of maintaining good relation with the hospitals, because they are the one who are treating our insured members. In India, and in our insurance policy coverage, member can go to the private hospitals as well as they can go to any public or government hospitals. But we encourage them to access the government and public hospitals, and we periodically visit those hospitals, make good relations with those hospitals, and make sure that our members get good treatment in those government hospitals and trust hospital also. We sensitize these hospital administrator about our members, about the types of insurance product we are offering, and why it is necessary to have the treatment should be low charge for our members, and that ultimately is resulting into the low premium. Then we introduced two new systems. Way back in 2008, we introduced the prompt reimbursement, where we were giving some amount at the bed itself, so that the member doesn't have to get out any money from their own pocket, and they have to they will get treatment. Now we are planning to introduce the cashless facility, which is as equal to the what formal sector insurance company are providing. And in that case, we are tying up with these hospitals. This will be a new experience for them also, for us also, for our member also. And with based on our good experience and relationship in past, we are now trying to move in such a case where member doesn't have to pay any out of pocket expense, and there should be no additional burden. So we are trying to have a holistic relationship management with this service provider and trying to keep it strengthened in future also. That helps us in adverse claim ratio also, maintaining managing any adverse claim ratio, because their hospitals gives us detailed report that does these members have any previous history of illness, or he or she is hiding something, or there is something which we should take care. So this constant relationship maintenance helps in lower premium for our member, low claim ratio, then it becomes a sustainable product for Vimo Seva, and ultimately these service providers are also getting members and business through our insurance cooperative.
Thank you, Shri. Tara, would you like to add anything to this?
No, I think we've been discussing the answers before we come to you, so it's fine. He sort of said what we had thought about. It's fine. We can go to the next question.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm keeping the camera off just so it's not too disruptive from my end. I have a question that has been asked to all of the panelists, and it revolves around the issue of financing strategy and ensuring that insurance schemes are financially sustainable. And Shri has spoken about this quite a bit, but if you can reflect again on this issue. And the specific question is, who can take on the responsibility to finance the social protection insurance schemes, especially in governments where the states have very low tax collection capacities? And how can the governments ensure financial sustainability of the programs in such poor countries?
So we recommended government also that first of all, you have to bring all stakeholders, the service provider, and for awareness creation, people's organizations like ours, and then bring every stakeholder, because the problem with this type of social protection, I am talking about especially about the insurance program, that in long term this should be sustainable, because after some period of time, if there are some adverse claim ratios, premium are going to be higher every year, and then even government cannot sustain those type of premium. So bringing all the stakeholders since beginning is certainly going to develop a robust systems. Regarding the financing those schemes, these are some of the basic social security needs which we feel as a workers organization that every government should provide, because ultimately it is going to help in the macro economy of the country by increasing productivity, by helping the workers and poor members by investing their assets in more productive use, and all these aspects are going to help in longer terms. So these are more sorts of investment rather than expenses from government's perspective.
Thank you. Christina or Matthew, would you like to add anything on this issue? Maybe Christina first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so my first comment regarding the question would actually be, I mean, yes, you may have low tax collecting capacities, but there are also other ways of actually paying, for example, directly paying the insurer, right? So that was also something that was presented earlier today. And then also premiums don't necessarily have to be too high. So there are some micro health insurance models also that show that. But at the same time, you also don't want them to be too low to actually cover people, cover women as well. And I think this is also where the data comes in. You really need to figure out how much are people willing to pay for their health or for the other insurance models, but what amount is too high for them. I think their data really comes in, because you need to make sure that you actually offer a suitable product to them, and yeah, also if it's a national scheme, you offer the right amount of coverage. And also, I mean, for, as I mentioned earlier, in these kinds of models, for the poorest households, there's always an option to just subsidize it. So you don't necessarily have to finance the whole insurance system through taxes, for example, but you can help subsidize other models as well.
Thanks a lot. Matthew?
Thank you very much. Well, first, we think that all those systems, especially the insurance components, can mostly work through private and public partnerships, meaning that we think that the major part of our portfolio will be progressively transitioned to the private sector, where we are increasingly introducing cash contribution, so that the participants increase their payment in cash of the premium, while we're helping them increase their income generation, their productivity, their saving capacities, so that after 4, 5, 6 years, they're able to completely afford the premium, and then they can be smoothly transitioned to the market. And so for those ones, there is like a very private angle in the end. It doesn't mean that the government can not subsidize the premium. So we're having access to subsidy systems in Senegal and in Kenya, where the government is giving us access to 50% subsidies, which is significantly lowering the premium, but also increasing the sum insured. But there is also part of the portfolio that is definitely too vulnerable and too food insecure, and for that reason they have to be really kept under safety nets. Sometimes they're even like labor constraints, so we can actually inquire about the usefulness of insurance compared to unconditional transfers. Second, I mean, for sure, those countries are very much constrained by low tax capacities, and so we need to have like really long-term strategies. That's for sure, and it's obviously included in a much broader economical development strategy for the whole country and for the low-income populations. And that's the reason why we think that our systems and those kind of social insurance systems have to be included in national systems, so that we can scale them up. We can build the most efficient systems and not like staying at rather limited scale. I mean, for instance, in Ethiopia with 30,000 people, it's interesting, but it's not definitely not national and not even regional level. Then to make the insurance the most efficient, we also think that it has to really target where it's performing the best. So as I was saying, for the low frequent, high impact shocks, and for that reason, we need to have like very efficient risk layer strategies. So for instance, we can have some systems with macro schemes to make like very early responses and lower the cost for donors and for governments, such as the African risk capacity. For the major shocks that are impacting the whole country, then we can have the microinsurance, then we can have the risk reduction and the savings for idiosyncratic shocks and for medium shocks. And on top of that, I mean, or parallel to that, the development of the income and the activities. The only thing that, Christina, you were mentioning during your presentation that is key, I think, and where we are all struggling a little bit, is the cost-benefit analysis. Because ultimately, we need to prove that those systems are indeed not cheap, but still cheaper than making response after a shock. to a large number of people. And that's basically what ARC is proving, that $1 spent through a payout of ARC saves $4.5 of, let's say, traditional response after a drought. And basically, that's the same approach that we're trying to have as well. Over.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matthew. I have few more questions, although I don't want to exhaust our panelists. So if we don't, if we can't answer all of the questions, we will do so online. So your questions will be answered. But let me pose two more questions that are more specifically related to gender issues. One relates to operational aspects of payment of transfers. And the question is question is first of all directed to Shri and Matthew. How do you address the security of payment transfers? And Shri has mentioned in his presentation that insurance is sold to women by women. And so aren't there any risks involved for their personal security when they have to carry the cash? And how do you address that issue to make sure that women are protected? And the second question revolves around the assessment of outcomes on women's time poverty. So again, it's asking Mr. Kumar and Matthew if you have in your impact evaluations assessed the impact of programs on women's time poverty, both in a positive and negative way, and in case that time poverty was decreased as a result of the contribution of the program on unpaid care and domestic work, could you share some of the good practices in this regard from the design or implementation of the programs that have contributed to these outcomes? I hope the questions were clear. So let's start with Shri first. Thank you.
Yes. So regarding this operational question, I would like to answer that. Still, you know, the informal worker mainly prefer to deal in cash, so they are paying their premium in cash. Although we are promoting and trying to bring other instrument of premium payment, including check, and in future we are also planning to bring digital tools also to pay. But we already make sure that the entire operations from our side payment is through check, so that risk is now almost over. But still, women are collecting premium in cash, and they are trying to deposit either into the bank account of insurance cooperative, or into the insurance office, or into the Seva bank also, from where they will transfer to the insurance cooperative, either on daily basis or maybe on a regular frequency, so that no more cash could be accumulated at their level. Obviously, they are from the same vicinity, so people know each other, and they are trying to manage the cash flow in such a way so that their member also should not feel burdened of paying the large sum of cash at one point of time. Neither they should feel burdened with all big amount of cash. Regarding the question of this study of time poverty, frankly speaking, we don't have any specific study regarding that, but certainly we have some internal studies regarding the social security services, which includes the health insurance, child care, that how it has increased the income and productivity of domestic worker more than 50%. Especially in case of child care, we have direct correlation. But the social protection instruments like insurance can help them from going falling into the poverty trap, rather than helping them out, getting out of those things. So for childcare, we have very good studies. And now I am requesting Tara Sinha to add in this regard.
Yeah, what I wanted to add is that the way in which insurance has been able to reduce the issue of sort of increase the time available for women to engage in their livelihood activities is because insurance is now available through the women to their husbands and children. So in case they require hospitalization, because they have insurance, they're more likely to go for the hospital care, which frees up the woman who otherwise in other circumstances would have had them stay at home and would have had to take care of them at home. So now that care which he would have had to take for the husband or the child in the home can now be taken care of in the hospital because they have hospital insurance.
Excellent, thank you. Matthew, do you have anything to add on these two questions?
Yeah, well, mostly actually to the first one. In terms of security, well, to be very honest, we think that there is a need to actually address the security issues for payment, I mean, cash collection and payment of the premium for both women and men. And I remember a claim settlement a couple of years ago in Malawi where we had to come with like two guards from the army to make sure that the cash distribution would be properly handled. And it's according to the usual processes of WFP cash distributions in the country. So it really depends. But beyond that, we're trying to have like maybe a smoother approaches. So for instance, we really want to invest in the mobile technology to improve information, but also like secure the cash transfers. But in general, it's not yet completely available in the countries we're working in, except in Kenya with M-Pesa. But we are working on some solutions in Senegal and in Malawi, and we have a solution in place already in Malawi with Airtel. But last year there was no payout, so we couldn't actually test it. And last year the cash collection wasn't in place yet. But so how do we do right now? We just implement very strict processes. In Senegal, for instance, where we do work with the saving groups to collect the cash contribution, they have some clear processes. They also have like a locked box to keep the savings. Part of it is actually kept within an MFI account, so that we're making sure that they can manage the cash. Clearly, there is much more saving than payout or cash premium. So it's definitely not the key issue for the saving groups. In Kenya and in Malawi, we're using bank accounts either of the groups or individuals. And so we have some clear ways of lowering the cost for participants and trying to optimize the process to make sure that it is still worth it to use the bank accounts for settling the claims. We also make sure that when there is a pure cash collection or cash distribution, we try to do it within 1 day, so that the insurance company or the MFI or the bank comes within 1 day and everything is collected or distributing at once, and then there is distribution, but the cash doesn't stay for all the community in one place for everyone. About the second question and the impact on domestic work, I have to say I'm not sure we're having also really clear impact. The only thing I can say is that the impact evaluation is definitely showing that in terms of decision making, the roles of women within the households is improved and strengthened in all countries, that the women are able to invest more and spend more time on their own activities. But beyond that, has it an impact on like lowering their involvement in domestic work and increasing the men's work, for instance? Honestly, I couldn't answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll have final question to Matthew. You spoke about the targeting that's actually focusing on the household as a unit, and it doesn't actually target the individual members in the household. So just to clarify, are you thinking of revising your targeting strategy in future? How feasible would this be? And also, what would be some of the pros and cons, do you think, in terms of the intra-household dynamics and the targeting efficiency? Thanks. This is the final question.
Thank you. So no, I don't think we will revise it because it's not our decision, but it's like the WFP policy. Because there is one very clear argument is that the food security is not calculated at an individual level, but at a household level. And for that reason, we are really trying to ensure the right level of food security, I mean, the minimum level standards of food security of households in the vulnerable areas. And so we won't specifically target women. It doesn't mean that in our program, we're not trying to make sure that there is the right gender balance, and that we are not forgetting or leaving aside the female-headed households, which are even more vulnerable, as you can imagine. But no, we will not switch to an individual targeting, although for insurance, as I was saying, it's still individual distribution. But as it's on an individual basis, we assume that based on all the awareness raising that we're doing, the decision is taken internally to the household. Over.
Thank you very much. I think we have come to an end of this webinar. I thank my panelists for their lively and very useful presentations, and I thank the audience for asking interesting questions. Thank you very much. And as I said, you can access the resources. You can access the webinar through the socialprotection.org platform, and you can engage in discussions with us in the future. So we look forward to hearing from you. And thank you very much once again, and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
O organizador